Cool. Thanks, Kobe. Again, really happy to be here, and it's been a really great conference. So yeah, I'm talking about development culture. I guess I'll click. So again, my name is Fonacier. Last time I was here, I gave a little small talk about my cat, who I still have. I am also the lead software architect at Spokio, so we're based out in Pasadena. And then that is my Twitter handle. So every time I give a talk, I like to have just a small personal story to break up the day. These are my two dogs. On the right, the black one is Bert, after Bert Cooper from Mad Men. And on the left is Hank from King of the Hill, Hank Hill. So the dog on the right, just your average dog-loving, human-loving dog, just dumb as nuts, but lovable. The one on the left is, by all purposes, just a psychopath. So one day, he's sitting on the couch, back turns towards everybody on the couch, so sitting towards the back of the seat, and he's chewing on something hard. The dog on the right, obviously just dying, like, what the hell does Hank have? Whatever he has, like, I want it, and just dying. And just like, what do you have that, like, your brother wants so much? And I got up off my seat and checked, and he's chewing on nothing. He's fake chewing on something just to get a rise out of his brother. Like, come on. That's my story. All right. So Spokio, what is it? And this isn't, please do not take it as hiring speak for Spokio. This is not what it's meant to be. I'm trying to give you context for the development culture we have at Spokio. So we are a people search engine. On the screen here, we have a search results page for the Donald Draper. And just for reference, this is used as an SEO page so that we can rank for Donald Draper. So assuming you search for not a name from a TV show, we're going to rank up there for names in general. Let's just go over like the random numbers that we have here at Spokio. So today, in general, we deal with up to around 12 billion records. I think that's pretty high up there. And in general, we deal with 18 million visits a month. So for all intents and purposes, we are a big data and high traffic-ish company. So let's hop into a time machine back in 2006. This is what our video games looked like back in 2006. Who was excited about the Wii? I was. We all were. It was bad. Also in 2006, we had this as our celebrity relationship. And we said goodbye to that relationship in 2006. Still broken up about that one. Also in 2006, Rails 1 was king. Just out of a show of hands, who has dealt with a Rails 1 code base? Oh shit, OG folks, that's awesome. Cool. I didn't, so hats off to you guys. So back in 2006, Spokio was a social media aggregator. In essence, you would, in a form, type in your friends' email addresses, and periodically the app would give you just updates on what they were up to on random social medias. So fast forward to 2010. We hop in another time machine. 2010. What did we do in 2010? These are what our phones look like. Who's still got an iPhone 4? Really? That's awesome. Good job, guys. Also, we said goodbye to Lost. I know, right? Well, yes, Jack, we do have to go back. and tell Damon to write a better ending for that show, right? So in 2010, Spokio took a couple pivots. What did they do between those 4 years? So they took Rails 1, that Rails 1 code base, and they upgraded to Rails 2. Upgraded, not rewrote, upgraded. And now, instead of a social media aggregator, they're in the people search industry. That's a really big pivot. So in general, Spokio, and this is actual numbers, I think, but over time, traffic grew exponentially for the company. And because of the pivots and the high-growing company and everything like that, and everything, lines of code, and this is pretty accurate actually, just grew exponentially. Also in 2010, this guy got hired. 15 pounds lighter and no hair. Look at that, just soak that. And actually that was posted on the company, like we have a Facebook, and that was on there for a while until they made me take it down. And so when I first got hired, I was completely and absolutely astounded at the level of technical debt within the company. And I don't blame the founders for the company because they wrote the code their own, but the company itself was bootstrapped. So, obviously if you're self-bootstrapped, you want to get to profitability as quick as possible, and so, whatever, right? Whatever gets to where they want to get to the quickest, that's fine. Again, I don't blame them. All right, guys, you guys ready for this? It's going to be fun. And I feel like this was the moving sort of focus of the company, like just move faster and then we'll figure shit out later. That was in the routes file. And this wasn't like, oh, they just forgot about it. This was actually used. I took this out, so you can't hit private functions. Like, that's not a thing anymore. And just to let you know, sort of the non-Railsisms of the site, this was very common. Needless to say, our routes file is rather small, so there were a lot of hidden routes in there that were really hard to track down over the years. So let's take a look at a controller action. So this was part of the SEO controller. I would like to show you more, but obviously for obvious reasons, this is an open source. I can't really show you everything, but notice the line numbers. So we start at 198, and this handles, right? This handles name SEO in general. So this is the controller action for name SEO, the predecessor of the page I showed you before. And we keep going. And notice the instance variables, and I'm sure we're nested in like 3 if statements. And we keep going. I know, right, guys? This is why I was like, what am I getting myself into? And finally we end, right? 381, which is crazy, right? And look at all the instance variables. I don't know what was going on. So in the end, 184 lines long, a ton of nested if statements, a ton of instance variables. We've all been there. We've all seen gross code bases. But what about the test? Maybe they just wrote tests, and I'm freaking out for like no reason. Just need to calm down. Just need to chill out. We're going to be okay, guys. Saving grace, the test. I know. And then I kid you not, 6 months in, I'm just like, holy shit, do I call JR on the phone and find another job now, or what? I was very close to giving him a call, by the way. And then so in the end, I don't mean to shit on the code base to shit on the code base. I just want to give reference points to where we were and for you guys to grab a feeling of how stuff was ran and where we are now. I'm going to have a lot of these quotes of the days, so start hashtagging quote of the day, QOTD. So your unit tests are only as good as the team buying into it and owning it. And I've been there. And this is the reason why. So every week or two, I was just given a feature, And if I'm the only one writing a test, I would just write a test for that feature, test for that feature. And then, a coworker unknowingly breaks a test. And I can't go to the coworker and say, like, yo, you broke my test. That coworker is going to be like, what are tests? What are you talking about? So I would just like, yo, I'm going to fix these tests, but you better not break them again. And, well, that's what happens. And this is what development culture felt like at the company at large, right? We were just given a feature. We would sit in a corner or in a room with computers with nobody there and just code away at it until you would come out a couple weeks later with that feature. And as long as it passed QA, it didn't really matter. And then so afterwards, after that sprint went out, I would look at the code and just be like, what is going on? And a lot of this, just not happy with where the code was taking us, what was going forward. And so at this point, I showed you the numbers, right? We're a growing company with a lot of traffic and the revenue is relatively high. How do you steer a ship that is moving when you're only one developer? And here is the turning point. So at the time, we were a Rails 2 code base. Luckily enough, I had 2 senior developers who said enough. Like, we want to upgrade to Rails 3. And how do you sell that to the management team who has been pushing forward constantly, trying to get the next feature out, trying to optimize conversions? How do you do that? Luckily enough, they were great communicators. And they said, there are a lot of benefits to upgrading to Rails 3. I know, in the end, it may not increase conversions. It may not, whatever, right? There's no end result as far as the product goes, right? But there are some benefits to it. Number one was the Google effect, right? As the developers went forward, they would Google active record, why is this not working, LOL, right? And they would come up with, Rails 3 examples at the time. It was harder to find Rails 2 examples for their problems, right? So we were wasting a lot of time on Googling for stuff that we couldn't find. Security patches, right? So I looked at the Rails 2 code base and found out when the last time someone patched to it, and it was years, right? So same thing's going to happen to Rails 3. We're just going to stop committing patches to Rails 3 at some point, and we don't want to be left behind. Bug fixes. I've come across this so many times where I come across an active record bug, and I spelunk in Rails, unfortunately, and I come across what's wrong with it, and I come across a fix for it, throw open a pull request to Rails, and they're just like, yo, only security patches. So we've stopped fixing bugs in Rails 3, and at the time, Rails 2. And lastly, the hiring effect. So we are a profitable company. We want to hire engineers, but nobody, I repeat, nobody wants to work on a Rails 2 code base. I've interviewed candidates before, and they ask me, oh, what version of Rails are you running? What data stores are you guys having underneath? And Rails 2, and they just sort of hang up the phone and don't even call me back. Luckily enough, the project was approved. And so the way they did that was they asked management to work in unison of their regular projects and the Rails 3 upgrade. And so as it got closer to upgrading, as the code base got closer to actually releasing, they stopped working on their regular tasks less and less and more on the Rails 3 upgrade. Speaks for itself, guys. How do we go about setting these patterns and becoming a better group, a better company for it, a better development team? How do we better ourselves? One way I sort of figured this out was dealing with the technical debt. I took on a feature for that name SEO page that should have taken me a day or two. And I said, look, I'm going to take a week or two and really pay down this technical debt we've built over the years. And the benefits are, you guys all know, sustainability, testability, the code's going to run faster, and it did run faster, and the knowledge of the code base. So there was just a lot of legacy, like random nested if statements that nobody knew what was going on. I don't know what I was going to say there, but whatever. So paying down debt, right? So you saw that long controller action. I start by looking at the huge controller action, just document line by line, like what is going on here, right? Usually on any given other code base, you would look at the test and understand what was going on from the test, right? But that's not there, right? So you have to do the documentation yourself. You've got to understand the code base at a very, very granular level. And then, as we were talking about before, just ack or grep your way through instance variables to find out, are you even being used, right? My next quote of the day. You feel good about yourself when you delete code. It feels good. It feels refreshing, like a nice cold shower. All right? So let's take a look back at this legacy code base. Let's take a look at this fun. It just looks like a clusterfuck, to be honest, right? But no, you got to look for patterns. Right, luckily enough, there were these overarching if, else if statements. The top part is for full name, and that is pretty large, but whatever. 323 is first name and name, last name prefix, right? So, Austin, FON. 351 was first name only, so Austin. And then first letter, right? So these are all the SEO pages for name that we had. So one thing I did aptly was to, create a name controller, SEO name controller, and pull these things out into different controller actions. Now, the routing specs become dead simple, right? You don't have a lot of different routes routing to the same controller action, so it's a little more verbose. Also, the function names are very communicative. You kind of know, just by looking at the function names, what they're up to. But the issue is I took that massive if statement and I just pasted it into that controller action. Unfortunately, the controller action is still, about 84 lines long. So you went from 184 to 84. You're buying something, but really, you're not buying that much. So how do we take it to where it kind of is now? Luckily enough, I read design pattern books, and I've seen a lot of talks from you guys. And so we encapsulate a lot of that logic into a service object, which we'll go into about later, right? So now we've taken a 184-line controller action. Oh, that's actually my next slide. 184-line controller action, down to 84, and now down to 6. You're probably asking yourself, where the hell did that logic go? You just can't magically hide 84-line logic just willy-nilly anywhere, right? And you're right, That's where the documentation and understanding came in, right? So this is, sort of a brief insight into the service object. And if I were to show you the whole thing, the whole service object, even though it's really long, granted, it's really long, every controller, or every function is around, at the very most, 3 lines long, right? So what should have been hard tests for a 184-line controller action became very simple. Deaf famous people, what that's going to return. The specs for that, dead simple. Also, when dealing with legacy things, I know it's a pain in the butt, but there were no factories involved with anything, so it took a deep understanding of the schema that we had, and it's not that simple. So this took a lot longer than I'm making it out to be, but. And that's true. I honestly believe leading by example is, gains me just an itty-bitty level of respect. I took this code, let's go back. I took this code to management and my team, and we had a meeting, and we said, this is the pattern I want to follow going forward. This is a pattern we should follow. I know it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a huge improvement, right? And the more we buy in to extracting methods out, having smaller controller actions, more verbose function names, the better we are off for it, right? Now we have some sort of level of spec coverage. Name SEO didn't have that many bugs going forward, and when we did, it was very easy to track down. And so they were all for it, right? And so, the lessons learned from going throughout and trying to create patterns going forward for the group were plentiful, right? I had this coworker whose main motto, and I kid you not, good enough isn't good enough. And I always laughed at that, and I always caught myself, and I own a very old home, and I do a lot of self-construction on it, and I'm screwing stuff in and be like, meh, good enough, right? It's good enough, right? And sometimes good enough is just good enough. Sometimes when you have a junior developer, a mid-level developer coming across a controller action that's even longer than name SEO, like 500-600 lines long, and we have that, right? Sometimes they don't have to refactor the whole thing. Sometimes it's just small method extraction, few controller specs, few method specs, and that's good enough. Going forward, because we have patterns set up, we implemented some sort of peer code reviewing. So not anymore do we have just features just rolling into, at the time, trunk, but now master. We didn't have features rolling into master without being checked by somebody. And that sort of curates, I've noticed, it curates more conversations within the group, more conversations within the company about how to code better, what can we be doing better, like what have we learned from all the conferences that we've attended, how do we make our code base better, how do we get better at being what we're doing. And that's, I feel, largely attributed to code reviews. And the third line, change is slow. It is really slow, right? That whole process I just spoke about took a year and a half long, right? So it's never really simple. And just roll with the punches, pick your battles. You can't have your cake and eat it too. High expectations. It's very easy to sort of brush off a junior developer's code as, that's okay, right? Like, method's a little too long, but, whatever, right? If the junior developer needs to take another pass at that feature again, so be it, right? Luckily enough, we live in a development culture now where we're given the ability to do things properly. If we have to cut that off for the next sprint, so be it. Luckily enough, I live in that culture. So now that we have decent patterns set up, we have a decent culture of talking about our code, of reviewing our code. Now I feel like the code base is slowly getting to that point, and it's a very large code. I wish I'd gotten the numbers. I should have gotten the numbers, but I feel last time I looked at it, we have nearly 70% test code coverage on the main application, which is huge, right? And obviously I can't write that all on my own, so there's a lot of buy-in from the group. But how do we go beyond just decent coding patterns into something more? And so this is sort of split up between half of what we've actually implemented and half sort of my speculation. Democratic decision making. So I hold a very powerful title at Spokio, lead software architect. I should be able to shoot down dumb ideas, such as moving. I'm a backbone type of guy. But we switched over to Angular because the developers wanted to do it. And so I didn't want to hinder the democratic decision making of the group. We need to decide as a group if we're going to move over to Angular, if we're going to now use whatever, right? So this has taken us really far. Encouraging side projects. So for those that work in a very corporate environment, you are set on a path. And that path is the main money-making application or a side service for that application or whatever. But side projects allow experimentation. For those that have work in a smaller startup, you're given a little more freedom. But side projects allow for experimentation away from your day job. It's a very good palate cleanser, right? So if you're bogged down in big data and high traffic and you want to try whatever, right? You can do that and it's a palate cleanser, and it's great, and it feels, refreshing. And I have also noticed that people who do side projects are excited to come into the day job and apply what they learned to their main application. And that's one reason why we switched over to Angular, because one of the developers did a side project in Angular and loved it and said, like, this will buy us a lot. And, well, now we're there. Lastly, side projects, developers gain confidence from doing it once over, right? So let's use the Angular example. If they spent one weekend muddling around and trying to get Angular up and running, they've already done that once, right? They don't need to spend those 2 days back in their day job, and that should be encouraged. Side projects should be encouraged. For those that are in Agile, spike projects are basically projects that will get thrown away at the end of the sprint. And I've noticed this to be a great motivator for experimentation within the group. So for example, we used to have one application running on MySQL, and we wanted to know how hard would it be to switch over to RDS, for example. And that was a spike project. And luckily enough, that didn't get thrown away. It got put into production. So in conclusion, I would say to the managers out there, or soon-to-be managers, invest in your engineers, because I'm first-hand recipient of that, where the engineers will invest back into you, invest back in the company, invest back into the product. You don't want some dead-end, Dwight-looking guy in the corner just soaking up money and not doing really anything, really. Or as I like to say, just treat the engineers like grown-ups. Let them make the decisions for themselves. If they want to do something, don't micromanage them, in essence, right? So I will be posting the slides, even though there's nothing really that technical on them. And then that's where you can reach me. And thank you so much, guys. Questions? So where I was in the company at the time, what was my biggest hurdles convincing up or down? And the answer is kind of both, right? Like, the CTO at the time was very, and he's going to be watching this later, but very overarching. Like, if you didn't like the way he did it, then it was just like, screw you. Convincing down was difficult because, the company is based on Pasadena, and Pasadena is on the east side of Los Angeles. And so hiring in the east side of Los Angeles is a very hard market to crack into, right? So we've relegated the fact of hiring non-Ruby developers, right? And so convincing non-Ruby developers to write tests, that's kind of a hard sell, right? So it's a little bit of both, unfortunately. And luckily enough, as the company grew, the CTO grew into more of a whatever role, and I was able to have a little more freedom, not enough to make these sweeping changes all at once, but enough. Any other questions? Yes?
What does RFND mean here?
No, that's a really good question. So that's a really good question. So R is my middle name, Ryan. F is my last name, Fonacier. ND, I actually went to Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks. So this was, it lived on from high school, and I just never got rid of it. It's one of those things. Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? Anyways, thank you again for having me. I really do appreciate it.